Dr. J. Franklin Schultz with a police perspective. And today I'm going to be talking about the federal role in law enforcement. One of the things that's unique about American law enforcement is that we do not have a national police force that is the primary first responder to crime and disorder. And we do not have a military based. Now, our organizations are quasi-military, modeled after a military rank structure and those kinds of things. But many countries have their national law enforcement as a branch of their military. And because we want local civilian control, we have about 18,000 different law enforcement agencies, and the vast majority of those law enforcement agencies are relatively small and serve populations of under 20,000. So that's a good thing because we want to have a high degree of accountability. If we have a fuss with the FBI or ATF or HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, who are we going to talk to? Our congressman? Who are they going to talk to? But if our local deputies are not performing well, we can throw their boss out of office by election. If our local police department is not performing well, we can get on the city council and or appear before the city council and have the chief replaced or have some reforms take place. Even on the state level with state patrols and state investigative agencies, we have a little bit more access to that cabinet level and even to the governor than we would for a national organization. Well, let's talk about what federal law enforcement does. First of all, I would like you to guess how many badge-carrying, gun-toting, federal-type agencies there are. And I will tell you it is at least 80 and probably more. Frankly, I lost count. Several years ago, I was at a training at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, where most federal agencies train, other than the FBI, of course, and they have Quantico, and then there's some other training facilities. But FLETC is really the hub for most federal law enforcement agencies. And I was counting, I saw on the wall all the agencies that trained there, and my last count was 72, and that's been about 35 years ago. So we know since 9/11 there's been a reorganization, and some other agencies have been added. Bureaucracies rarely get smaller. We'll see what happens in the next 4 years. And there are many that we don't really think about. You know, we have the federal game and fish people and the national park people, and of course we have the Secret Service, ATF, the big ones that we know about, of course the FBI, Homeland Security, and let's see, IRS has Criminal Investigation Division. The Atomic Energy Commission has armed folks. We have the GSA, General Services Administration. They have their federal police. If you're ever in Washington, D.C., just count the different badges. There are uniformed Secret Service people, Capitol Police. Supreme Court has its own police. And there are uniformed FBI personnel that are in marked patrol cars. And so there's just a lot of agents. And if you want to do some research, you can look it up and see how many, in terms of numbers, agencies that we have. And of course, the Border Patrol and Customs Enforcement folks, and just literally dozens and dozens of others. They have jurisdiction over crimes that are defined as criminal behavior under federal law. Now, we also have military police. If you're in the military, you are under the jurisdiction of a unique set of laws that apply only to the military, and that's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And so that's a different set of laws and a different set of judicial procedures that protect due process for members of the military. The unique thing about the UCMJ that is not true to my knowledge, oh yeah, there's tons of tribal police as well. that's unique to the military under the UCMJ is that most jurisdictions are over some type of space. The continental United States, the state of Colorado, the Jefferson County, Broomfield City and County here in Colorado. But if you're in the military, it doesn't matter whether you're on base, off base, or in outer space, you are under the authority of the UCMJ. So if you go off base, let's see here in Colorado, one of our big military installations is Fort Carson in the Colorado Springs area. If a soldier goes off base and robs a store, they can be prosecuted by the UCMJ, by the military, and punished that way. Where we have localized jurisdiction from folks like the FBI is, first of all, they cooperate in many, many ways. Now, there's been a lot of anti-Fed and anti-government worker rhetoric here in the last month or so. And I want to tell you, I've worked with ATF, I've worked with FBI, I've worked with Postal Inspection Service, postal inspectors, I've worked with DEA, and let me tell you, all of those folks have been super cooperative, super helpful. They don't come in and try to take over. I've had them help process large evidence scenes, make some connections, and I can't speak highly enough. They're not publicity hogs, at least in my experience, and so that's very important. And that has always kind of been the case, but it was particularly increased under the Nixon and Reagan administrations because of the drug enforcement issue. And so because of drugs and gangs go together, we started to have task forces with U.S. Marshals, another great group, DEA and ATF, working with local task forces and special groups in order to attack some of those problems. And so that spirit of cooperation is much better than you would see on TV, because clashes of ego and agency and jurisdiction make good drama for TV and movies, but that hasn't been my experience. Now, again, in addition to just cooperating with local agencies, you might find that the FBI is investigating a bank robbery. Well, why is a bank robbery a federal crime and a convenience store robbery is not a federal crime? Well, banks, credit unions as well, are covered by FDIC, which is Federal Guarantee of Deposit. And so the feds will sustain a loss or potential loss if a bank or credit union is robbed. And so that brings in federal jurisdiction. We also have a presumption since the Lindbergh kidnapping case way back in the first third of the 1900s, where if there's a belief that a victim has been transported across state lines, then the FBI can get involved, even though it might be a kidnapping event that happens in a local jurisdiction. We don't know if state lines have been crossed or not, but we can assume that and investigate that and have FBI and other agencies to assist. And now with the internet, interstate commerce, those kinds of things, telecommunications infrastructure, all those things can bring in the jurisdiction of the federal government. Now, aside from that, there are other ways that the feds can influence local law enforcement. We have the FBI National Academy, a J. Edgar Hoover invention, where he wanted to involve local law enforcement and train them to bring up professionalism. And we can talk about the history of professionalism in law enforcement sometime. So he started the National Academy, and it's a very prestigious, frankly, I think it's overrated, but that's just because I haven't gone. That does some training for local law enforcement and even international law enforcement. So that's another way that local law enforcement has been influenced culturally by the feds. One of the other things that is important to understand about federal influence, two things actually. One of them is the Department of Justice may, in determining that there have been complaints of disparate or race-based policing or excessive force routinely in policing, they can investigate an entire agency and look for what they call a pattern and practice of unconstitutional behavior. And of course, the constitutional provisions are the right to an attorney, the right to reasonable force, the right to privacy, all those kinds of things. First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendments. So they can come in and investigate the police department. And what can happen, and it happens far more under Democratic presidential administrations than in Republican presidential administrations, and you can look at that pattern over history. I think there'll be probably far fewer of these, maybe not civil rights investigations, but civil rights mandates. So what can happen is the feds can say, we're going to sue you and force you to engage in changes to make your policing more constitutional by whatever guidelines and standards they choose. And then you'll be under court order. And most of the time, that's kind of plea bargained out, and the city, rather than try to fight it, and these are basically larger police agencies for the most part, they'll say, yeah, just whatever, go ahead and do what you're going to do. And so they'll appoint a special master, and that person will be the one that puts pressure and monitoring and accountability on police administrators, and they have to change policies and training and do all kinds of things to dance to the tune of these special masters and these court orders. And it's very difficult to fight. It's very expensive to fight. It's also very expensive to maintain. And there's not necessarily an end point. Seattle, I think, was under federal civil rights jurisdiction for like 10 years before they were finally released. So that whole system, it seems to me, is a little loosey-goosey. It's a little politically driven. I'm not saying there aren't agencies that need to be investigated. There aren't agencies that need to engage in some major reform. Not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the weight of federal authority and the anvil that they have for control is maybe disproportionate to the idea of locally controlled law enforcement. Now, the other thing that the feds can do is to dangle funding opportunities in front of police departments and say, okay, you need new cars, you need additional hires, you need additional training, you need facilities, you need equipment, radios, firearms, whatever. We'll maybe grant you some funding for that, but here are some hoops you've got to jump through. And many times that means you've got to go through some what we would call woke or politically correct, and I'm just lumping that in. I'm not saying that all of that stuff is worthless. But you know, what cops need is what cops need to do to come to your 911 call. And sometimes the political vicissitudes and control, people who think they know what policing ought to look like, are imposed through the funding. And so that's another way that they can have control. There have been efforts to get rid of qualified immunity, and that's another subject that we need to talk about. Qualified immunity just makes all kinds of common sense. It's not a get out of jail free card. It just says if a police officer encounters something where it's unique enough so that there's no clear legal or procedural guidelines what to do, they're just using their best judgment. They have to act because of their legal mandate to act. And if something bad happens, let's give them a little break. Let's not sue them for being in a position where they just had to make a decision. Otherwise, what we're going to get, what we're already getting, is what they call depolicing. Why go? Why rush to the call? Why intervene voluntarily? Why do any proactive policing? Because there are lots of ways for a police officer to get in trouble. They can be accused of lying, which can ruin their credibility, which can ruin their career. They can be subject to department discipline. And I'm not saying that any of these things ought not to happen, but I am saying when the public demands for accountability, there's a ton of accountability. They can be sued in state courts. They can be criminally charged in state courts. They can be sued in federal courts, and they can be criminally charged in federal courts. Where's that federal jurisdiction? The 14th Amendment, post-Civil War, which said, oh, by the way, the Constitution applies to local governments, which it really hadn't until the 14th Amendment, that if you violate somebody's federally guaranteed or constitutionally guaranteed rights as someone acting under color of law, if you do that, then you're committing a federal crime. So there's 5 or 6 ways to lose your career, get criminally charged, get sued, have all these kinds of challenges. And so people say, well, why do we have a recruiting problem? One of the reasons is, who in their right mind would go out there and risk your life, and then even with a successful, absolutely lawful, ethical, moral police action that your community expects you to do, you can still suffer those consequences that can ruin your finances and career, and maybe even put you into hiding for the rest of your life, as has happened with some officers, and Darren Wilson is an example from the Michael Brown shooting and subsequent disturbances in Ferguson, Missouri. One other thing that can happen that can facilitate local law enforcement through some federal intervention is the opportunity to get federal surplus, military surplus in particular. Let me tell you, nobody wants an MRAP, okay? No police department wants an MRAP. What they want is a custom-designed $500,000 tactical and rescue vehicle that private corporations can make and build and customize, that can be used for flood relief, that can be used for hostage rescue, that can be used for extraction, all kinds of different things. And by the way, there is no civilian tactical vehicle in policing that has a machine gun mounted on top, okay? There's none. I've offered a financial reward for anybody that can say that there is. There just isn't. But you can get an MRAP basically for free. Pay transportation costs, you keep up the maintenance on it, and it can be very functional. You can do a little bit of customizing on it. And so at least you have a vehicle where you can put in some cops, take them into a hot zone, maybe even under fire, rescue some people, insert some police officers in there, and bring it into a situation. If you've got an active shooter in your school, you want the police department to have an armored rescue vehicle. And if we say, well, we don't want this military stuff, well, do you want fire trucks? That's pretty heavy duty stuff. Do you want firefighters to have self-contained breathing apparatus? Do you want them to have fire-resistant gear? Do you want them to have a helmet? But when police officers want to wear ballistic vests and tactical gear and helmets and have shields when they're going into a hot situation, we say, oh, they're militaristic. We can't have that. Yes, we can and we must, because it's important in today's environment. So those are some thoughts about the feds and local cops. If you have any questions or if you have any suggestions about what you'd like to hear me talk about, then please contact me at the information below. By the way, again, I'm not looking to be a huge internet influencer. 2 people may watch my videos. The most I've ever had is 2,500 plus on videos. My articles that have appeared in national publications have much higher readership than that. But my point is, if you like this, then hit the like. If you want to know when another episode's coming up, hit subscribe. If you think there's somebody else that might have an interest in this, even if they're going to be a hater, and believe me, I get death threats for this kind of stuff, then share that thing, and maybe more people can get a little bit of information, some insight, or at least one opinion on one side of the issue, and then they can have some facts that they can move forward with. So thanks for tuning in. This is Dr. J. Franklin Schultz with a police perspective.